Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with James Hodson, the co-founder and CEO of the AI for Good Foundation, and Lacey Hunter, the co-founder and CEO of TechAid.
Started my career with 8 years at Wells Fargo, doing a variety of different lending disciplines. Moved into corporate finance, got a little bit tired of the compliance environment and regulatory heavy environment in the banking sector, which, starting in June of 2008 in financial services was an interesting time to be working in that world. And from the corporate finance side, ended up pivoting to tech, again, through sort of a finance angle, but spent 5 years at Amazon before sort of jumping into the world of entrepreneurship.
Great, thanks, Lacey. James?
My background is really as a researcher in artificial intelligence. So my background academically is computer science and philosophy, with PhD work being completed in artificial intelligence as a Marie Curie fellow in Europe. I spent a few years as the head of AI research at Bloomberg, which is kind of where I defined a lot of the usage of artificial intelligence within the finance sector, but also more broadly in terms of how the academic community and the industrial or kind of industry can collaborate better, and how that interfaces with the way we use technology in society. As you know, the Bloomberg Foundation and Bloomberg Philanthropies are very big on using technology in society, and we had a lot of projects that started from there. In fact, a lot of what led to the AI for Good Foundation, which is what I've been leading for the last few years, really stemmed from early experience at Bloomberg and kind of through those fantastic networks.
Great. And you went to Princeton as well, right?
That's right. Yeah, my undergraduate was at Princeton.
Got it. Okay, wonderful. So Lacey, let's jump back to you as far as, give us a little more detail on where you went to school and how your path sort of, weaved and winded along the way.
Yeah, for sure. So I went to undergrad at Pepperdine University in Southern California. Not a difficult environment to be in. You're very close to the beach. You can take surfing as a class. It was amazing. But I majored in international business and I minored in Spanish. And I ended up graduating with way too many credits because I also decided, well, I have the chance to study abroad in Germany, and that has nothing to do with really either major. Maybe I could take some sociology classes in there. But I basically had a chance to, really sort of double down on the core finance, accounting, business skill sets, and also live abroad. So I got to live in Spain for a while with a family, attended university in Madrid, and also got to live for a year in Germany. And I think those two experiences really informed how I thought about my career and the things that I wanted to do in the future. So, but the first really 8 years only worked in the US. So I only worked in, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, so kind of the key cities you sort of think of with finance and those sorts of things, and thought, well, gosh, maybe I'll never really get to use this international business skill set that I have, or at least thought that I had started to develop until going to business school here locally in Seattle. So I went to the evening MBA program at the University of Washington, and it was really hard because all of your classmates and yourself were also working a full-time job. So you had to get really good sort of at deciding, what's good enough, A, and B, prioritization. So those skill sets really helped. But when I was in business school, I had a chance to do a couple of different sort of study tours and a consulting project in Cuba and in India. And those two sort of experiences also really informed what I wanted to sort of do if I ever had the chance when I grew up, sort of thing. But I grew up in Seattle. I was raised here, so it was a bit fun to come back, have a chance to go to business school here, reconnect with friends and family and those sorts of things, and just try to be prepared for what was next.
Great. Thanks for that detail. And James, give us a little more detail. I know there's so much there, right? But give us sort of the detail on that ending part where you came, where the vision for AI for Good happened, and then the segue from Bloomberg, I guess, into the foundation.
Absolutely. So I guess for a little bit more context, so I grew up only in Europe, mostly because of Brexit now, and it was half in the UK and half in Italy, and obviously I'm not very happy about that. But it's still the European continent, as much as maybe the European Union would not like it to be so anymore. However, I moved to the US when I was 19, and I was kind of a natural entrepreneur, if you will. Maybe not by success rate, but certainly by ideology and the way that I approach the world. I started my first business in the ed tech sector at 16, and we built basically models that could be used interactively in the classroom at the secondary education level to help teachers track how students were doing, and ironically, to remove the burden of technology in the classroom, to let students learn naturally with the support of technology. When I was in college at Princeton, I started a couple more businesses that were similarly veined. They were basically looking to solve challenges both in the education sector, but also in terms of how people interact with each other, how information is processed, and basically making it easier to govern, making it easier for people to make decisions at a societal level. And so the themes that I kind of brought to the table when I ended up working at Bloomberg were also on the edges, very much motivated by what is best for the system and the institutions so that the incentive structures are aligned for the participants. And obviously in financial market, those incentive structures are quite natural, right? And they lead to the right price for the right security. And they lead to people being able to agree and act efficiently around these concepts. What I started to notice at Bloomberg with our interactions with the academic community is a lot of it was governed by what some principal big tech companies wanted to do and what challenges they had, right? What they were willing to fund predominantly, rather than looking at the broader picture and saying, well, how do I engage with the challenge of climate change, for instance? Right? As a machine learning researcher in academia, how do I engage with these big challenges? They weren't engaging. In fact, if you look at UNFCCC report up until this year, it talks a little bit about AI. There are like 2 citations to machine learning research out of like thousands of citations in the report. Overlap is very small. When I realized this problem, and the more conversations I kept having, and the more keynotes I was being invited to give about this topic of convergence between academia and the big challenges in society, the more I realized kind of that the writing was on the wall. I needed to do something bigger around that friction, that challenge. I had the toolkit from working at Bloomberg, right? I had that world-class research team that I've been working with. I had relationships with the top universities. I had a perspective also about how institutions work and how they can affect decision-making. And that's what propelled me to start the AI for Good Foundation. So it was kind of that entrepreneurial bend mixed with this kind of blended experience and identification of this big challenge, which I saw as central to solving these societal problems. I think we need the engagement of these smart people who otherwise sit in ivory towers, and we need to find the right bridges in order to get that input.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And what year did you start the foundation?
So we did a lot of internal work in 2014. We had a series of workshops with top AI researchers at Stanford, but AI researchers from everywhere, but at Stanford physically. And that led to the creation of the formal foundation in 2015. So we've been around for about 8 years, which some reason people now tell me, oh, that's before AI, right? It's before AI became sexy. I was like, well, I actually, one of the reasons I studied AI in the mid 2000s and even before then, I kind of worked on this stuff was because I thought it was sexy. But I guess my ideas of sexiness are not maybe aligned with everybody else's.
Well, now it's very sexy. But as you know, there's waves of AI over the years, 70s, 80s, 2000s, and 2020s, right? So it's been around, just not as sexy. So Lacey, talk to us about how you came into this sphere of social entrepreneurship.
Sure. So keying back to my interest in international business and working abroad, this really did start with my time at Amazon. I did have a chance finally to work on 3 different teams that had sort of global presence and operations, and that included the Prime subscription team, where I was leading FP&A for that org, and then also customer loyalty, where I got to really support the fresh business and see firsthand, there's a lot of common themes that apply no matter which country you're in. people always want convenience. People always want to be asked, what do you need? Where are you? No one wants a late delivery. No one wants to receive something that they didn't want. And so just sort of core principles applied, whether you were operating in Japan or Germany or the UK or Australia. And so, after a good amount of time there, and actually after COVID and becoming a first-time mom in 2020, it was really tough. And just coming back to work in a fully remote environment and trying to span multiple teams and do all of these things sort of from home, also with a new kid and sort of unreliable infrastructure and childcare and those sorts of things, thought, I'm going to take a career break and just take a pause and sort of figure out my next step. And of course, during that pause, a friend from business school said, "Hey, I just kind of got my interactive mapping software startup into Techstars. I heard you might be leaving Amazon. Is this true?" And I love this person. Was like, "Yeah, I'm leaving. But sure, right, show me more. Tell me more about this app that you're working on." So I ended up joining forces with a colleague from business school and just working on, a really cool startup that I saw the need for an application for immediately, which was really an economics problem of how do you match supply and demand in a smart way, using someone's phone. Can they pull up a map and see, oh, yes, these are the things that I'm interested in, that I want to navigate to without having to consult a bunch of lists or pull a bunch of blog posts together and these sorts of things. And so that experience through the most sort of crazy set of circumstances led me to the World Economic Forum, where Jim, where you and I met, and where I actually had a chance to sort of, work with one of the facilitators at the side events and use our software to map sort of what events were happening and when. And this is one of those things that I've always read The Economist. I love that publication, and never in a million years thought I would have a chance to go to something like Davos, and getting a chance to go there and sort of see what was going on and how people were interacting was quite frankly amazing. And I happened to attend a panel one of the mornings where really the topic was, how do you use technology for the humanitarian aid sector? And the topic of the conversation was specifically, how do we get the right kinds of aid to the right people in Ukraine? And this was a really big challenge, and I think kind of still is. And so I sort of went thinking, well, I'm going to learn something. I see the moderator writes for Forbes, so he's probably an interesting guy. That gentleman is now my co-founder. And I thought really I had nothing to really add, but maybe I could ask a few questions and learn sort of the name of the game in the space. And what I learned was, the technology adoption curve is not equivalent between the public and private sector. I just assumed that it was. I had never really looked into it. So through that panel and just sort of asking a few questions and saying, hey, at Amazon, this is sort of how we approach things, not super high tech. There was a machine learning component to translate free text comments into categories, topics, and then sort of surface the themes that were coming up most regularly. But, again, nothing super fancy. It was like, hey, we'll send you a mobile survey and understand if you're getting the things that you expect to be getting when you expect to be getting them, and then sort of do that at scale. Could that not be useful in the humanitarian aid space? And so, that was not that long ago. That was last May. So since then, I've just sort of been pulling that thread and continuing to have conversations with folks and trying to find the right next step there to use technology at scale, really for needs assessment. Needs assessment, two-way communication, and then a feedback loop that's super critical to understand, hey, are the actions that we took actually useful? Were they the right ones? Were the outcomes good? Why or why not? And those sorts of things. So that's just a bit about how, the winding road that I took to get to where I'm at today, and having this conversation with you too.
And then, so then you connected with James, right? And so why don't you sort of, talk about that, and then we'll talk to James about what everything the AI for Good Foundation does.
Yes, absolutely. So the saying that, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every so often, or like a stop clock is right twice a day. James and I were introduced completely randomly. It could not have been more random, by a gentleman that I happened to be in a car with on the way to an event. Said, hey, what are you working on? What's your bag, Lacey? I think that's exactly what he said. And I was like, well, trying to use technology in a smart way to sort of help match supply and demand, specifically in these recurring crisis situations that we know, climate change are going to be more frequent. There's a conflict in Ukraine. I think there's something here. He was like, huh. Yeah, I know a guy you should talk to. And he stopped right then and emailed James, and I think copied me and said, hey, there's this guy who has this foundation, and I think he's trying to do exactly what you're doing. I looked at the email, and then I looked at the website of the AI for Good Foundation and saw Humanitarian Aid 2.0 and was like, is this a real person? Oh my gosh. So I got on the phone with James basically as soon as I got home, as soon as I could, and I mean, we basically joined forces since then because it's interesting when you find someone that's trying to work on a problem in a similar way as you, but that brings a different skill set to the table, which, you know, my background's not academia. I cannot write a line of code. And, you know, can do finance and some other, you know, some other skill sets, but it was one of those things where I was like, well, I feel a little bit weird trying to research a technical solution without a technical partner. And, you know, enter James and all the work that he'd already done to say, well, here's what I've learned, here's what's worked, here's what hasn't. So, you know, I'll stop there, but it was a random, I think it was blind luck. So really glad to have had that introduction a couple of months ago.
Yeah, no, that's the power of serendipity, right? And just even how we met was amazing. James, go ahead. Talk to us about your side of that story and the lead up to it.
Well, yeah, it was the first time that there was anybody dumb enough to get caught by our phishing scam that we put on the website about humanitarian aid. But I guess, you know, it led to good things happening in the end. So I was happy to meet Lacey. But I think actually the person who introduced Lacey to me was actively just trying to get out of talking to me, and this was their way of doing it, to throw Lacey into the path instead. Look, so we obviously for 8 years, 7-8 years, had been working on technology solutions through many partnerships, also with the UN, that would help governments to, you know, make things simpler for their citizens, and also to understand better where they should be investing, how they should be investing, and what the impact of technology is on society. So when the war, full-scale invasion, let's say the war in Ukraine started in 2014, but full-scale invasion of Ukrainian territory by the Russian military happened in February last year, we immediately pulled together kind of the Ukrainian contingent of our network, which basically was a bunch of economists who are Ukrainians but work in the US, together with kind of an international network of people interested in the Ukrainian question and wanting to help in one way or another. And those are technologists, economists, kind of ethnographers, historians, kind of spans a whole range of things. And we very quickly set up a kind of a mini organization within AI for Good, which we called Economists for Ukraine. And again, why do we say economists? Why not AI people for Ukraine, right? Oh no, AIers for Ukraine. Well, our mission statement as an organization is economic and community resilience through technology. And we make it very clear that it's through technology, because technology is the toolkit. Technology is the methodology that you can use in order to think about the question. But ultimately, economics is how we organize our society. It's how, well, economia is how you organize your household, but economy is how we organize our society. And we want to help societies organize better. We were put in touch with Kiev School of Economics. We were put in touch with the Ukrainian government through various channels. And one of the big challenges that they came back to us with was, we have no idea what people need across the country. When organizations that are trying to help come in, they're posting information everywhere, and the Russians are using it to kill people. The Russians are using it to plan drive-by shootings at pharmacy lines. They're using it to destroy our hospitals. They're using it to destroy our schools, right? And they're using it to destroy shelters also premeditatively, right? Because they wanted to basically take out the stability of society. We realized quite quickly that there were a few things that AI could do, and in particular that just basic computer systems could do in order to help in this situation. One was that we knew we could better authenticate and verify users and limit the scope of information that people could access. And that was a big thing that the Ukrainian government needed at that time, because people are overwhelmed with information and it's very difficult to keep track of how it's being used. So you need to solve that problem. Second thing is, we need to get all of this data about what's available organized so that we can recognize when things are missing and where they're missing. People didn't have any clue, because it's a big patchwork mosaic of different organizations offering different things, and they don't collaborate. Justifiably, they don't collaborate because they don't know about each other. It's a confusing environment, and they're just trying to get that one thing done as quickly as possible, right? So it's difficult to coordinate. But enter kind of our overarching plan for the Life Force platform, which is essentially what Lacey also came to the conclusion was needed in such an area, which is a supply and demand matching platform. But instead of it just being kind of behind the scenes B2B thing, we put the phone in civilians' hands and say, look, if you need insulin because you're a diabetic, you click here on medicine, you select insulin, and we're going to show you which place you go to right now to get the thing that you need. And if that thing is not available, we're going to ping our system and make sure that people realize that that resource is missing in this area and that you need it. And probably other people need it too. And we're going to do that while keeping you safe. And we're going to use machine learning in order to ensure that all of the users of this platform and all of the data that's being put in respects certain structural assumptions that we have and is able to respond when those things look different to how they're supposed to look in order to get the right people involved at the right time to fix it. And that was essentially the economic and the technology basis for our main intervention in Ukraine, which is in partnership with the Office of the President of Ukraine. And we've had the honor of meeting President Zelensky on multiple occasions and working closely with his office, and also with the Ministry of Digital Transformation, which is this fantastic DIA platform in Ukraine, the e-government platform to rule the world, as I call it. And through those relationships, we've really been able to build a fantastic ecosystem, which now Lacey has really been able to get deeply involved with and guide kind of the business development aspect of that to make it sustainable over the long run.
That's an incredible story. And clearly so many challenges along the way. We could probably get into those, but talk to us just, you talked about Economist for Ukraine and Life Force. And, I think you mentioned before, there's some other things. So was there anything else that the AI for Good Foundation does?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. That's a great prompt. So we operate under three verticals, right? There's one which we call intelligent societies, and that's really making sure that the incentives and the technologies align for solving core societal challenges. And it's very much in partnership with governments at the national level. We write national AI strategies. We help with economic development plans, but also governments at the city level, right? Helping to really understand how to interact with the final stakeholders, society, right? The people. Our second vertical is what we call humanitarian aid 2.0. And obviously Life Force fits under humanitarian aid 2.0, which is a silly name, but it gets the point across that we're trying not to change the game. We're trying to reduce frictions in the ability of stakeholders and actors to do the right thing at times of crisis. We're also trying to improve the resiliency of communities so they can solve their own problems during crisis, because frankly, nobody wants the Red Cross and the International Rescue Committee to arrive swooping in with parachutes to save the day. They would much rather fend for themselves. They would much rather build businesses that can survive through these times, and they would much rather have control of the situation themselves, right? And the third area through which we work is about catalyzing innovation, right? Innovation is the root of progress in society, and innovation doesn't mean adding technology necessarily. It means pushing towards better solutions that are adapted to the conditions and the problems that people are facing. So it's not about just plugging AI into everything, but it's about being conscious of the context, and it's about making sure that you're providing the tools, again, to those communities to be able to think about what would be the right structure of a solution and how do we actually implement it and deploy it, right? Trying to be as anti-colonial about this as possible, which obviously with my British roots might seem a little bit difficult, but we're doing our best. Those are the three areas that we work through. Obviously in Ukraine, over the last year and a half, our operations have ballooned. We have close to 40 full-time staff. We have multiple community centers and offices across the country. I've been sanctioned by Russia. I'm no longer allowed into Russia because I've been helping the Ukrainian government too much. Well, obviously, helping them at all is too much, according to the Kremlin. But obviously, quite proud of our ability to help on multiple dimensions and to really get involved through what I call the excuse of technology. And we can talk about the excuse of technology a bit more later as well.
That sounds good. Thanks for that clarification. Okay, so Lacey, talk to us more about TechAid and the vision for that startup.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of hilarious to say this out loud because I thought, oh, surely something like this already exists. But TechAid and LifeForce are really two sides of the same coin. But TechAid was started and incorporated as a public benefit corporation. The reason that that decision was made draws primarily from my experience in the private sector, having never worked for a nonprofit, having never sort of worked in that side of the house. I thought, well, in theory, this should run like a business, even though it has a social purpose. We should have metrics that we measure every month so that we understand how to tie our inputs to our outputs. We need to be able to understand how much, return on investment we're getting for every dollar in, whether it's a head count, whether it's a deployment to something, whatever it is. But at its core, it's, as James said, it's basically the exact same concept, which is, hey, use a machine learning enabled stack in the background to help match supply and demand in a smart way, but put the power of that matching in the hands of the user. So exactly like we did with Amazon Fresh, or that I kind of helped the team do with Amazon Fresh, is enable the user to say what it is they need and where they are. And doing that at scale in a smart way is really how you can enable good interventions and sort of measuring your progress. Now, it's really been a very short amount of time. So I only became sort of aware of this problem in May of 2022, really. So fast forward till now, I mean, TechAid has been around for less than a year. But the thesis is, or the theory is, since sort of joining forces with James and the AI for Good Foundation, there should be a path where a parent company can operate as a foundation or a 501c3 that says, hey, this is our mission statement. We exist to use technology to further good in the world, maybe do it along these various channels. And there should be subsidiaries that operate under that same mission statement that don't just exist to maximize shareholder profit. I'm all for that in some regards up to an extent. But given the sort of pressing nature of challenges that we're seeing globally, I mean, not limited to climate change and conflict, but inflation, I mean, there's all sorts of topics where it's like, is there not a good way to sort of combine the best practices of the public and the private sector together and put those things together where you can have a sustainable business that generates enough revenue to pay the team? That's sort of exactly what the LifeForce application attempts to do, and Economists for Ukraine attempts to do in the communities they're engaged in. Enable resilience, enable a long-term trajectory, enable something to continue as a going concern that doesn't rely on these episodic, receipts of grants, essentially, and a continued sort of grant writing function as the only source of bringing in revenue. So I sort of thought, I'm sure a lot of people are doing this. A lot of people are not doing this. However, we at least have one example in the Mozilla Foundation that James came across, where if you look at Mozilla Corporation, the parent company is a foundation, and they've got several for-profit subsidiaries that sort of exist in tandem. So that sort of in a nutshell is what we're attempting to do. And my, initial assumptions for TechAid have turned out to be wrong of, surely we'll find, large, well-funded NGOs that will be excited to have, basically a supply optimization tool that will help them to, sort of coordinate from the supply side. But it's a different world. And so we may have some success along that route eventually, but this is the sort of thing that I thought, we'll get this figured out in 6 months and kind of move forward. So it's going to take a bit longer than that, but there are plenty of other sort of avenues that we could go down to figure out a responsible, sustainable way to generate revenue and profit with the exact same set of tooling and technology. Like, that's really it in a nutshell. It shouldn't have to be one or the other. Is there a way to, really be responsible and do both, where you're making your shareholders happy, you're making your employees happy, incentives are aligned, and you have a good group of constituents that are all sort of winning together. So it's a little bit contrarian and maybe not as common of a thing as I thought maybe existed, but that's what we're working on together.
Yeah, and as you know, as we've discussed, there's so many potential use cases. So it's just a matter of finding the lane, the funding, the support, and I'm totally optimistic and supportive with what you guys are working on. So let's go back to big picture, right? So obviously, James, you've been in this AI sector for many years. Obviously, there's so much buzz still and hype around ChatGPT and generative AI. But I really want to get your perspective, James, on this as far as, you've seen where we've come. I'm sure you can get your crystal ball out and try to see peek into the future. But talk to us, just give us sort of how you see everything that's gone on and where we're going.
My crystal ball's a bit rusty, Jim, but let me see what I can give you. I think right now we are justifiably in a big boom of experiments around what is essentially the harnessing of computational power to build models that are very, very, very good at predicting kind of the types of interactions that happen and data that they've seen, right? And some of these models also give the appearance of being somewhat good at reasoning about the things that they've seen, right? About actually being able to draw inference from things that they've seen in the past and applying it to prompts that are given in the future. And a lot of that comes down to natural language and computer vision, right? Which are areas actually that we thought would be the hardest parts of AI to really make progress on. But it seems that we've had some major steps forward. I would caution still that there will need to be at least several more breakthroughs before we reach any of kind of the utopian outcomes that some people talk about. However, these tools are going to be a fantastic driver of business growth over the coming years because it drives people to experiment. It drives people to innovate. Anything that creates the right environment for people to put in more time and effort and to try things and to build businesses is great for the economy. It creates jobs. It creates better outcomes because better solutions come when people are competing to solve something. And although, ChatGPT is a bit of a gimmick in terms of, its actual core value proposition, it's a bit of a gimmick. Many of the things that it can be used for, many of the prototypes that I'm seeing being built, especially when it comes to replacing kind of core aspects of how information is shifted about, right? And how people acquire and use information, even within kind of fairly scientific disciplines or technical disciplines, it has the opportunity to short circuit a lot of processes that previously took up manpower and distracted people from solving core problems. And that means we'll see more innovation as a result. It means we'll see people focusing on a broader range of challenges that were previously not accessible, right? Because of the cost and the effort and the energy involved. My hope is that we'll be focusing more of that slack energy that we've now freed up towards some of these big challenges that we have to face as human beings, right? Faster green transition, right? Better, stronger institutions, right? Simplified geopolitical interactions, right? How do we manage our global economy in a way that is just more sustainable for the future, right? How do we manage our energy needs in a way that's more sustainable for the future? We're going to have definitely increased efficiencies. There's no doubt about that. Nobody can argue that we're going to increase efficiencies. The question is, how do we spend that increased effort that we now have in ways that are going to be fundamentally useful, right? I'm not particularly impressed by anything that's been done with ChatGPT related technologies so far in terms of fundamentally changing the human condition. But I'm very hopeful that just the huge number of people interested in experimenting with it is going to have a monumentous effect on our economic output over the coming years.
Yeah, clearly, as you inferred, right, in healthcare, in education, in clean energy, right, AI is going to have a significant positive effect. Now, there are some downsides, as I've been speaking about in recent months, about the misinformation and deepfakes and the bad actors, and we've heard about guardrails, we've heard about global potential cooperation, or at least domestic cooperation. What's your take on those managing those downside risks?
To me, So I would look, I'm not as pessimistic as some other people because the way I see it, the capacity for humans to consume information is the same as it was. In fact, judging by the ability to focus of some human beings, it's maybe less than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But it's roughly the same, right? We're human beings. We can take in a certain amount of information each day. We need to build ways of ensuring people are aware of what they're consuming when they're consuming information. But I'm not worried about AI generating 500 million stories a day because there's nobody who's going to consume that information. However, the structure of the information channels needs to ensure that people are able to differentiate. People are able to choose those channels that are reliable and those channels that are part of a formal institutionalized infrastructure for sharing and gathering and using information. And I think that, take AI aside for the moment, we've done a very bad job of that with social media, which basically went from having a few thousand journalists in a country to having millions of journalists in a country, right? So factor of 1,000 times the content without any way for people to really tell what they should be consuming, what they shouldn't, how to be skeptical, and how to be just conscientious consumers of information. And that problem is now going to get magnified. But fundamentally, we haven't solved that problem. In terms of other risks, like risks of joblessness, risks of fundamentally shifting our economic fabric and things like that, I believe for right now, we're not at risk of any large-scale fractures in our economic way of life. And, as somebody who visits relatively poorer countries on a regular basis, I can tell you that there is no sign of life when it comes to AI outside of Silicon Valley and a select few other centers. And we need to be very consciously aware of the fact that when people are proclaiming that the world is about to change, that the world is not just the Bay Area, right? And it's not just New York and it's not just London, it's the world. And there's a lot of friction in place, and we need a lot of good business minds there in order to actually kind of make those seismic shifts for the people where it matters.
That's really insightful, James. Thank you for sharing that. And that's a hopeful outlook. Before we conclude this talk, I'd like to ask sort of for short answers to a couple of questions. So the first one is, can you give one tip for new social entrepreneurs? Lacey?
Sure. And actually, I'm going to key on a couple of words that James just used quite a few times. One was focus and one was distraction. And it sounds a bit ironic for someone that's saying, hey, I've got a great solution that revolves around a mobile phone. It's put your phone down. Consider why you're using social media and what you're getting out of it. Consider that you're making $0 an hour for time spent on social media. And like James just pointed out, that you can't really parse in a smart way what it is you're consuming. And you may find that being present, being engaged, going for a walk in the woods, answers may come to you that wouldn't otherwise if you're kind of sitting scrolling mindlessly on your phone. So I would say just be very mindful of your attention and your distraction.
Great. James?
Make sure that you're fundamentally solving an important challenge. Make sure that you're solving something where there is a clear friction. And so don't just do something because the technology exists right now to enable something flashy. Do it because it's fundamentally an important thing to do, and the market will come because of that.
Great. And speaking of AI, every entrepreneur is trying to leverage AI. So one tip for entrepreneurs who are trying to leverage AI, Lacey?
Sure. It is so good as a brainstorming tool. If you're thinking okay, I need to get a post out, go hop on OpenAI and ask ChatGPT. Do you have 5 suggestions for blank? And it might just prompt you to sort of get over that activation energy needed to come up with a list of good ideas. It's like, okay, these are good enough. I've got a starting place. I can sort of, add my own touch to this. So I would say use it for brainstorming.
Great thought. And James?
You've got an extremely powerful tool in AI. You need to make sure that the data that you have access to is relevant to the problem that you're trying to solve, and that AI is actually going to be a lever that makes a big difference in that solution. And if it's not going to make a big difference in that solution, then don't worry about it for the time being, right? Collect the data, make sure you're curating, make sure you're building the systems, but do it for the right reasons.
Got it. Great, great insights. Okay, now we usually end with a poem or quote. Lacey, I'm going to default to you first. Go ahead, ladies first.
How did you know I had something? No, I'm a big fan of John Wooden, and a quote of his, he has many, but he was UCLA's sort of famed basketball coach. And he had a saying that he would refer to often, which was basically, things work out best for those that make the best of the way things work out. And really what that gets to is that you don't have control over much. Maybe, your attitude, how much sleep you get, maybe, unless you have small children, but focus on the things that you can control and just keep going, try to maintain a positive attitude, because you really don't know, is it going to rain or is it going to be sunny, or are you going to close that deal or not? You don't. There's so few things to control. So really try to stay optimistic and just keep going.
Sounds good. All right, James, go ahead.
Well, I like to talk in epithets, right? So I guess what I would say is what I've noticed over the many years, right, and many of the problems that I solve happen because society and our governments keep trying to divide by zero. And so what I would say is, my quote is, assert denominator is not zero before you do anything, and hold people accountable for not dividing by zero in our society.
I love that. I love both of those. That was great. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.